Talking to yourself in front of a camera is not like a bike, and I can assure you that it is harder to do the longer you have been away. Hi, I'm alive, and welcome to the Moody Reader Tag. I'm going to be reading these questions off my phone. I have not prepared since I don't have the headspace, so let's see how this goes. Do I consider myself to be a mood reader? Absolutely. Probably to a fault. I do not even want to attempt to explain to you how chaotic my thrift books cart has been recently as I've been cycling up and down. I am someone who gets fixated on certain ideas, certain feelings, certain moods, aesthetics, and then I completely follow through in that. The next question is, do you set TBR lists and do you stick to them? I have set one TBR in my entire life, and I have failed it miserably. I'll link that video up in the atmosphere since I did have a lot of hope and faith when I made it. And while I have read some of those books on that list, TBRs are not for me. When I watch that video, I'm like, wow, my sweet summer child, you had no idea what this year was in store for you. And my reading absolutely does follow my moods, as I said by the first question. Do books affect you emotionally? Does the mood of a book rub off on you? See, normally I would say no, and that's not a critique of the books. Of course, there are books that make me empathize with the characters and get very invested in the story, but if I read a sad book or a happy book, it's not likely to make me sad or happy for the rest of the day. However, I made a grievous mistake, which was rereading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath during a period of mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual downturn in my life, and mistakes were made. Excellent text, don't know what the hell I was thinking. So that was a situation in which I probably should have read something that was the opposite of my current mood, but in general I can be pretty okay. I tend not to be spiraling out the rest of the day no matter what I read. The next question is, when you're feeling sad, what do you read? Or do you not read when you're sad? This is an interesting question. Feeling sad and feeling exhausted are two very different things to me. When I'm exhausted, I don't read. When I'm exhausted, I can barely do anything, even focus on a TV show or a movie. When I'm sad, well, sad's such a simple word. I don't know if I'm ever gonna make this video, but during my last downturn spiral, I read a bunch of books that I would describe as terrible. Not terrible as in they're terribly written, but they just feature horrible characters. And for some reason, that is all I wanted to do. I was in this, depressed state, and instead of reading things that would be uplifting and joyful and hopeful, I was like, let me read about some of the worst literary characters in history. Now was the time to commit myself to finishing Catch 22. Call it self-sabotage, call it, rolling in the deep, whatever you want to call it. But when I am in the pit of despair, I often just wallow there. Moving on. Most often, do you read books to escape, to learn, or to critically reflect? This feels like a trap. This feels like a trap to me because I remember all those conversations on BookTube about people who read for enjoyment versus people who read critically. And it seemed like such a strange conversation to me because who among us lives their entire life in a binary such as that? I think they're books that are incredibly entertaining that I also engage with critically. I think it's fun to engage critically with the most trite, trash, surface level type material because it is just fun to explore things and to break them down and to dissect them. One of my favorite things to do is to take things that probably should not be thought about that deeply and think about them that deeply. I am the antithesis of it's not that deep. So I'm going to say all of the above. In general, I would probably say less so on the escape side because I don't often read books that I would want to escape into, if that makes sense. When I read Daughter of Fortune early this year, that was one of the few books where I was like, wow, I feel like I'm being transported to the territories of California. I feel like I'm being transported to China. I'm really like letting myself kind of fall in love with these characters and fall into these characters in a way that takes me around the world. But in general, I read books that, yes, captivate me and hold my attention and have me invested, but I don't necessarily want to escape into the premise of those books. So kind of an answer. I refuse to just choose one of those three, but I think you get the gist. What is a book that made you laugh out loud? I'm actually going to pick Catch 22. It is quite the absurd novel. And it's one of those books that there are moments where I was literally raging and moments where I was like, what the actual fuck am I reading right now? And the moments that it made me laugh out loud those moments were moments when the characters themselves seemed to recognize some of the absurdity of the situations in which they were being put in. And as a bystander or witness, there were these, very interesting literary setups. There were these, metaphors, these one-liners from beautiful Italian prostitutes that just had me kind of throwing up my hands and being like, of course, this is where we've ended up. In general, though, I'm not someone who has very vocal or obvious reactions to what I'm reading, probably because I was one of those people who took a book with me literally everywhere I went when I was younger, and I learned that to have any type of reaction that other people could acknowledge would lead them to ask you what you're reading or what you're thinking about, and then I'd be forced into a conversation. And if I wanted to have a conversation, I wouldn't have brought a book to a public place. So I learned to keep that, no mask on very, very early on in life. So in general, even when I'm alone, I tend not to laugh out loud. What is a book that has made you cry? Or if you don't cry, one that really moved you? I tend not to cry at books. The Bell Jar really moved me, not only for the scenes in which I was like, I am relating a little too closely to these characters, but also for the scenes in which the side characters, the supporting characters, were clearly having a life that was equally as deep and rich and intricate and complicated, but you're never going to be able to fully explore that, not only because Sylvia Plath unfortunately killed herself when she was young and we will never get any more of her writings, but because The Bell Jar is a semi-autographical book. So of course, not only is she focusing on the life and the stories and experiences of the main character, but Sylvia Plath herself, I think it's safe to say, was also processing everything through her own perspective of her experiences in New York at the internship, of her experiences with losing her virginity and dealing with her mother and all of these things. So it's one of those situations where it's like, I know that the characters in this book were based on real people, and never getting to know how they feel about the way their story was used in this fiction and never getting to know what actually happened to them made me really sad. So maybe not the traditional answer, but that's how I landed on that one. Excuse me, I have to take a bougie water break. Moving on. What is a book that you didn't even know how you felt about? I don't really have an answer for this one, but I'm going to go with Kindred by Octavia Butler. I know how I feel about that book. What I am not sure about is my ability to articulate those things to an internet full of strangers. That book is brilliant, but so challenging, so nuanced, so intense. And the relationship between the main character, Dana, who is a contemporary Black woman who is, against her will, pulled back in time to Maryland, the time of slavery, and ends up developing a very unique and strange and intense relationship with Rufus, who is the son of the slave master and plantation owner, who eventually grows up to be the slave master and plantation owner himself. Like, I could write a whole dissertation on that book, and perhaps there is a part of me that doesn't know exactly how I feel about it, because in general, I'm pretty good at being introspective and figuring out how it is I want to communicate what I feel. But maybe one day that video is like perpetually on the back burner. I would highly recommend that book, but also put the largest trigger warning possible on the cover of it. It is so well written, but it is not an easy adventure to partake in, even as a viewer. So, Kindred by Octavia Butler. Ooh, we have a weather question. Are you more likely to read on a sunny day or on a cloudy day? It is irrelevant. As much as I love the aesthetic of gray skies and slight rain and, candles lit everywhere, incense, books, for some reason a skull-like goblet filled with dark red wine, the weather has absolutely zero effect on how much I read or if I read. Although I do like the idea of it, I hardly ever follow through with that idealistic, very, very aesthetic setup of what it means to be a reader on a rainy day. Speaking of aesthetic, unrelated, kind of related, I would highly recommend you checking out a video essay on the phrase aesthetic, how it's evolved over time and what the word means now in our social media landscape, by Mara at Books Like Whoa. I watched it today and I really, really enjoyed it because it is one of those words, it's one of those words that I was first introduced to in academia, but then quickly started using it in the way that I saw other people using it on social media. And it's a really, really fascinating breakdown about fashion and individuality and the role of social media and individuals becoming brands and how that affects a very specific idea of what is and is not aesthetic. So sidebar, but I would definitely recommend that video if you have the time. Next is a question I kind of already accidentally answered. Do you usually set the mood when you read with music, lights, smells, etc.? Absolutely not. If I had to do any prep for reading, I would never do it. I'm normally on the couch because that's where I spend the majority of my time at home. I normally am reading physical books because that is my preference. And occasionally I may or may not light a candle. We have a bunch around because my partner is obsessed with them. But like at the end of the day, I just feel that urge and I follow it. Again, I love looking at inspiration photos and Pinterest boards of people's beautiful lush chairs and their tall libraries with dark stained wood. Like maybe one day I'll get to live out that fantasy. But for now, I just be snagging something off the shelf that catches my eye, and then I plop down for anywhere from 30 minutes to 4 hours. And finally, can I leap from book to book, or do I need some buffer time in between? Again, I cannot overemphasize how much I do not recommend reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath when you're in a certain headspace. That one I needed some buffer time. But in general, I am jumping. If I am in a reading mood, it is back to back to back to back, and the times in which I am most excited to read is when I've just finished another book. I tend to go through periods where I'll read a ton at once and then have kind of like a lull, whether that's emotional, mental, whether that I'm just super busy. For example, this past week was my first time ever taking midterms as a student while also writing and grading midterms as a teacher. So I am exhausted. So I've read nothing this past week. But I have been excited to get to some spooky short stories, my seasonal annual scary movie marathon, some anime that's been like in the back of my mind for months that I keep wanting to sit down and commit to, and of course some amazing authors and books for Hispanic Heritage Month. So I am excited to get re-engaged with this channel and re-engage publicly with the things that I've been reading, because I have been reading during my time of solitude. But yeah, I felt like the Moody reader tag was a great way to kind of ease myself back into it, because I'm explicitly talking about my vacillating, wishy-washy, intense moods. So thank you again to Christina from Christina Loves to Read for tagging me in this video. If you watch it and have interest, I tag you. I would love to see them. And hopefully soon, I will see you next time. Bye.